paradrama tales.
My parents called me, stingy after I funded my brother's life for 3 years, but when I refused to pay more, they faced a reality they couldn't ignore. How did I discover that generosity can slip into exploitation? And what happened when I finally said no? When I first pulled into my parents' driveway, it felt like slipping back into an old, familiar sweater, comfortable but a little scratchy around the collar. I'd graduated college, landed a decent job in marketing downtown, and realized that paying $2,000 a month for a cramped studio apartment didn't make sense when Mom and Dad were offering me a room for $800 a month, utilities included. Dad being a sales rep who worked from home half the time, and Mom teaching high school English meant there was always someone around the house, and I figured their version of family helps family was a fair trade, low rent in exchange for me kicking in some household help when I wasn't at the office. My sister Sarah, the PhD student in NYC, rolled her eyes when I told her the deal, warning me that parents who charge a child rent are setting you up for something. But I waved it off. I just wanted to save money and avoid rent hikes. The house itself was a comfortable mid-1990s split level with hardwood floors, a slightly squeaky staircase, and that faded wood chip wallpaper in the foyer that I'd always loved because it reminded me of home. Dad's little home office off the garage was scented with coffee and business brochures, where he closed deals over the phone, and Mom's classroom decorations, college pennants, motivational quotes, lined the fridge where our family chore chart was laminated under a layer of magnets. At first, everything felt almost idyllic. I'd come home, swap stories with Mom about my weekly trivia nights, or joke with Dad in the evenings about how the marketing world was just a fancy way of saying I sell stuff for a living. My brother Marcus, just turned 22 and heading off to a local state university, was always around, sprawling on the couch with his earbuds in, pretending not to hear me ask him to clean his dishes. And I remember thinking that paying $800 in rent, covering my share of groceries, and occasionally mowing the lawn was a small price to pay for the simplicity and support of being under their roof. A month into this setup, however, I was summoned to what Dad called a family meeting after dinner one Tuesday night. Marcus had just received his financial aid package and clearly needed help with tuition for his engineering degree. Mom and Dad laid it out smoothly. "You're doing well at work, and you live here rent-free, reasonably cheap," Dad said, tapping his glass of iced tea against the table. "So maybe you could help us cover some of Marcus's expenses." I nodded, feeling that familiar tug of loyalty mixed with pride. Yes, I wanted to help my kid brother get his degree. "It's only for a semester," Mom explained, pushing a folded spreadsheet across the table with the expected tuition costs. $3,500 to start, $200 more for lab fees, and another $300 for... "Don't worry, just chip in what you can," Dad said. Sarah, who was FaceTiming me from her dorm that night, muttered something like, "I tried, but I told her to chill out, that this was just family doing family things." Still, it felt odd. My help began with tuition, then turned into a new laptop, another $1,200, so Marcus could keep up with his software requirements. And suddenly, I was the family's go-to wallet. Whenever I tried to bring up that maybe Marcus could get a part-time job, especially since I saw him posting selfies in the dorm lounge instead of ads on Craigslist, Mom would cut me off with, "He's under a lot of pressure, sweetie," and Dad would add, "You're lucky. You didn't have to work through college." It was subtle at first, that shift in power. My suggestions for boundaries were dismissed as not being a team player, and the household rhythms began to make me feel like an outsider. I'd get texts at dawn about unexpected fees or urgent needs, and if I complained about noise while trying to work on weekend projects, they'd say, "He needs to blow off steam." But if I wanted a quiet evening with a friend, suddenly, the living room was too messy for guests. Looking back, I realized those early days weren't a warning sign so much as a red flag waving in my face. Mom's gentle reminders about how family takes care of family, Dad's offhand compliments that sounded suspiciously like guilt trips, and Marcus's growing expectation that I would just handle it. But at the time, I was so eager to believe in the ideal of helping my brother and living with my family again that I didn't see the line being drawn until I'd already crossed over it. By the time November rolled around, the helping with Marcus's tuition plan had morphed into a recurring cost center that no one seemed to question, except me. I'd already written my parents' checks for $3,500 for fall semester, plus $1,200 for the laptop they insisted he needed, as well as $400 more for ergonomic chair and desk accessories to improve his study environment. What started as one lump sum tuition check had become monthly installments for textbooks, $200 to $300, lab supplies, $150, and even random software subscriptions, $50 each, that popped up on his student account, always presented as essential. Behind each request satire of urgency hid a power play. The longer I funded, the more I felt indebted and trapped. First, there was the emotional leverage. Whenever I hesitated, Mom would sigh and remind me that this is what a big brother does, while Dad, arms folded, would add, "Don't make your mother cry." Suddenly, I was in the room facing my own guilt, told I was selfish if I didn't hand over another few hundred for just this one more thing. Second, the financial manipulation was subtle but relentless. My $800 monthly rent payment vanished into thin air. As far as they were concerned, I paid rent. So any additional gift of cash for Marcus was a bonus, not a loan. I tracked expenses in a spreadsheet, line items for tuition assistance, book allowance, equipment upgrade, transfer to Marcus, miscellaneous fees, until I realized I was spending nearly $1,500 to $2,000 of disposable income on their family budget every month. Meanwhile, I was living on Stouffer's frozen dinners, skipping doctor's appointments, and patching my tired Corolla's squeaky brakes because I felt obligated to cover every need without question. And then there was point 3. The shifting rules at home became glaring. I couldn't invite one friend over for a casual movie night because the house needs to stay quiet for Marcus's study group. Yet my brother could have his buddies milling around until past midnight, playing video games in the same room my laptop and freelance work setup occupied. When I tried to voice my frustration, they told me I didn't understand life under academic stress. But when I wanted to work on a weekend freelance project, something I needed to save for my own future, I was shushed. "Don't you dare miss family dinner," Mom would say, eyes flicking to the pile of tuition papers on the table. Even small purchases like a $60 physics textbook for me or a $50 replacement backpack were criticized. Why are you wasting money on yourself when Marcus's future is at stake? Meanwhile, Marcus would happily order $30 Uber Eats delivered daily at lunch, all charged to my bank account because I'm too busy with a midterm. The morning I bought him a nearly new 2019 Honda Civic for $19,000 from a local dealership, a generous attempt to cut his 40-minute bus ride through slick roads each day, I thought I'd secured his gratitude. Instead, he rolled his eyes and told me he really wanted more horsepower, like Jake's BMW. Suddenly, my car, my independent asset, felt worthless compared to his whims, as though no gift was ever enough. I was learning that hidden costs weren't just financial. They were emotional, mental, and physical, as the constant whispers of family helps family overshadowed my own needs. By month 3, I realized these helping hands were really opening palms, directed entirely at my wallet. As the dollar signs piled up, so did the power imbalance. The more I paid, the less voice I had in decisions, and the more I felt like a deposed volunteer. I'll admit, it took quiet moments staring at my dwindling bank balance and an overdue force of realization to see their pattern. But I was determined to reclaim my autonomy, and soon everything would come to a head. When I saw Marcus trudging home from campus in a torrential downpour, textbook bags soaked through and shoes splashing in puddles, my heart sank until my practical side kicked in. I'd spent 3 years footing his tuition, buying him books, and even covering his rent share, but watching him march through that rain convinced me it was time for something bigger. So, one Saturday afternoon, I walked into the local Honda dealership with my heart pounding and my bank app open on my phone. Within an hour, I drove off the lot in a cherry red 2019 Honda Civic, low miles, impeccably maintained, and perfect for Iowa's winter chaos. That night, I rang the front doorbell, and Marcus answered with a teenage scowl. "Cars are for show-offs," he muttered, but his eyes gleamed as I handed him the keys. "Don't thank me yet," I warned. "Test it in the snow tomorrow." He chucked the keys into his backpack as if I'd tossed him loose change, slamming the door behind him. I should have seen the escalation coming the moment I made that 6-figure deposit into his bank. The next afternoon, I wandered into the kitchen to find Mom scrolling through her phone, brow furrowed. "I saw you bought him a car," she said without looking up. "Must be nice to have money to burn." That casual barb stung more than any "thank you" would have pleased me. I realized quickly that the $19,000 loan, gift, didn't soften their attitude. It sharpened their expectations. 2 days later, my phone buzzed with Dad's urgent text. "Mom's washing machine finally died. You'll cover it, right? We saw some fancy Samsung on sale for only $1,200. Without missing a beat, I replied, "Sure, happy to help." After all, he'd greeted my Honda purchase with an approving nod. But as I sat at my desk counting out $1,200, I felt my chest tighten. That same evening, Marcus stopped by my room, hurt lining his voice. "You know, I was actually hoping for a BMW." My pulse jumped. "You wanted a BMW? I bought you a reliable car that won't rust through by next winter, and you call it basic?" I snarled. He shrugged. "A Civic is fine, I guess, just not my first choice." Fury boiled in my gut. Before I could respond, Mom's voice floated down the hall. "Why are you shouting? Some people would kill for a reliable car." I burst out of my room. "Because your definition of reliable means I get nothing but contempt for doing my best." Silence. My parents traded glances. The power dynamic had shifted. I wasn't just the bank. I was the one setting the boundaries, and they didn't like it. Over the next week, the escalations multiplied. Dad cornered me in the garage. "Family helps family," he cautioned, voice low. "It's almost Thanksgiving. Tuition's coming due again. I assume you'll take care of Marcus?" I paused, fingers tightening around the toolbox. "You needed this year's tuition?" "Figures. But I've already funded enough decisions this semester." He looked taken aback. "We're asking you to prioritize your brother's future." "I prioritized him enough to buy him a car," I countered. "Now it's his turn to figure out how to pay for gas." That retort hit him like a physical blow. Meanwhile, Marcus texted, "Need 600 for winter tires. Don't leave me stranded." I didn't reply, let him sweat, and figure it out like I did. The true escalation arrived one evening when I tried to study in the living room, and Marcus barreled in with his friends, blasting music through my laptop speakers. "It's just a study group," he shrugged. "Your turn was last week." I removed the stereo's O cord and said, "I paid for this room too. No studying means no music." His friends gave me hateful glares as he growled, "You're ruining everything." That phrase cracked something inside me. "No, I'm ending this one-sided financing," I said. From tuition to car to wear and tear, I'd been his silent sponsor for too long. The sudden turf war, civic versus family demands, revealed where my value truly lay to them, a credit source with zero appreciation. That night, I lay awake replaying every slight, the stingy comments, Mom's multi-tier wish lists, Dad's lectures on family duty. The car I bought had become the wedge separating me from anything resembling peace at home. I realized my only choice was to sever that funding entirely, and so I drafted a text. "I'm suspending all financial support, tuition, car, everything. Until I am treated with respect, I'm done." I hit send just past midnight. Within seconds, my pockets buzzed with calls, texts, and voicemails. Panic set in across 3 generations. Their reality war unfolded just as I'd planned. No car, no tuition, no washing machine. No more invisible chains. I exhaled, a strange mix of guilt and exhilaration. The Civic would be theirs to fund now, but the freedom I felt was worth every ripple of fallout. Something had broken, but in the wreckage lay my boundary, my future, and that was the real gift. By the time I sat down at my desk that Tuesday night, I was so jittery that I could hardly focus on my dual monitors. Instead, I opened a blank spreadsheet. Column headings stark and menacing. Date, expense, recipient, amount, and category. My fingers hovered for a moment over the first cell labeled January 2020, the month I moved back in after law school. In that moment, it felt as though I was about to expose a wound that had quietly bled for 3 years. Clicking into that first row, I typed January 2020, rent, parents, $800, and exhaled hard. That $800 had felt like a fair trade at the time. Pennies compared to my comfort living in Boston proper. until my parents used it as permission to expect more. By the end of that night, I had rows for every mortgage payment I fronted, $2,900 a month for the house, entries in bright red, like blood spatter. Then came tracker lines for Marcus's spring semester tuition installment, $3,500 in late January, $600 for his engineering textbooks, $1,200 for his study chair, which I later discovered was a gaming rig masquerading as ergonomic. I felt bile rise each time I typed $1,200, parents' washing machine, recalling how Mom casually asked if I could help because that Samsung is on sale when her 10-year-old model sputtered its last. As I worked, I knew this wasn't simply a tally of numbers, but a ledger of the psychological ledger I'd endured, the passive-aggressive mutter of, must be, nice to waste money whenever I treated myself to a $60 video game, contrasted with their open-door policy for Marcus's friends to pound loud music in my study until midnight. Simple sums built into bigger totals. $19,000 for the Civic I bought for Marcus. $3,700 co-signed credit card debts that appeared out of thin air. I saw how my $800 rent payment became a bargaining chip whenever I wanted privacy. Sorry, the living room is too messy. While Marcus batted away any suggestion he find a job. Row after row, I chronicled each deposit. $3,500, $2,900, $1,200, $1,000 for Mom's iPhone upgrade, $1,200 for Dad's gas grill. I typed with a shaking hand as I reached the final ledger line. December 2022, rent, parents, $28,800, 36 months at $800. Summing the rightmost column, I watched my eyes go wide, nearly $60,000 over 3 years. That number stung, like a punch in the gut, because it made tangible what I'd known in my gut all along. I'd been their invisible ATM, politely donating until I realized I'd been donating my dignity too. In that dim light, the spreadsheet glowed like evidence, proof that my generosity had been weaponized. I closed my eyes and leaned back. The phone's glow dimmed behind me. I realized that this digital ledger was more than a list of transactions. It was the truth my mother's tears and my father's guilt trips had tried to hide. All those times I swallowed my frustration, swallowed my pride, convinced myself that helping my brother and parents was an honorable duty, only to find that honor had become a noose. Now, armed with numbers and furious clarity, I drafted a single email to my parents. You asked for help. I've documented everything. We need to talk about this. Even as I hit send, my chest pounded. I knew that sharing this spreadsheet would burn bridges, but I also knew that I could no longer live under the illusion that love meant silence. Heart in my throat, I watched the clock tick past midnight. My inbox dinged only once, a red receipt. No reply. But the urgency thrummed through me. I had exposed the ledger of my life, and there was no turning back. When I hit send on that email, I felt a curious mix of dread and relief ripple through me. For months, I'd tiptoed around my parents' demands as though I were balancing on an emotional tightrope. But the moment I documented every dollar I'd poured into Marcus's tuition, the house payments, the washing machine, and the grill, and then pressed send without a single apology, was when I finally drew my line in the sand. In that one click, I turned intention into action. And for the first time in 3 years, I felt the weight of obligation lift almost imperceptibly from my chest. The next morning, Dad called. His tone was calm at first, like he was merely checking the weather. Then, when I answered, he paused as though reading from a script he wasn't prepared for. I saw your spreadsheet, he said quietly, voice cracking. We need to talk. My heart thundered, but I remained seated behind my computer, straightening my shoulders. This was exactly the conversation I'd been bracing myself for. As my parents arrived that afternoon, I prepared myself by reviewing 3 things. 1, I am not their bank. 2, I deserve respect and quiet in my own home. 3, I will not be guilt-tripped into forgiving without acknowledgement. Sitting across from them at the kitchen table, I realized how stoic I needed to be. My mother's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Marcus leaned against the doorway, arms folded, gauging my reaction. Sarah hovered behind me, her presence a silent pillar. I took a deep breath and began. I love you all, but I have to protect my own well-being. I have every right to live my life without funding everything you do." I paused to let the words register. I can't pay for Marcus's tuition anymore. I can't cover the mortgage, and I'm not buying another appliance or device for this family. Each phrase landed like a hammer on fragile porcelain. I could see their expressions shift: confusion, hurt, anger. Dad, ever the salesman, tried his usual approach. "Son, we sacrificed so much for you. You live here rent-free and now you're shutting us out? We need your help." I nodded once, deliberately. "Let's be clear. $800 in rent each month isn't enough to offset my contributions over the past 3 years. I've helped because I cared, and I still do. But I can't continue to enable a pattern that leaves me drained and resentful." My mother's lip trembled. She opened her mouth to argue, but Sarah gently placed a hand on my mother's shoulder and said, "Mom, let him finish." The room grew oppressively quiet. In that silence, I felt a small, fierce satisfaction. I was no longer the silent workhorse, picking up the pieces without a conversation. Marcus stepped forward, voice low and defensive. "So you're just cutting me off? After everything?" I met his gaze levelly. "This isn't about punishing you," I replied. "It's about teaching responsibility. If you want to stay in this house or keep the Civic, you'll find a part-time job. I'm not your ATM. That's my boundary." His jaw clenched, and he muttered something about betrayal before retreating. Once my parents left, Sarah turned to me. "I'm proud of you for speaking up." In her eyes, I saw the quiet courage that had carried me through these past months, the steady support that had kept me from backtracking. By evening's end, I sensed a profound shift. The family dynamic had altered, and I no longer felt like an invisible wallet. For the first time, I slept without that familiar knot of dread in my chest. Drawing this boundary was neither easy nor painless, but it was essential. I had to assert that love doesn't demand unlimited self-sacrifice, and that true family support includes respect and mutual responsibility. As the midnight hour approached, I finally felt free to close the door on years of silent obligation and to reclaim a life that belonged to me. 2 days after my no rang through that dinner table, the temperature in our home shifted from icy resentment to bone-chilling tension. Mom woke up crying before sunrise, her muffled sobs drifting through the hall like a funeral dirge, and I realized then that her performance was meant to be seen. By breakfast, Dad had taken up a post at the kitchen doorway, arms folded, watching my every move as though I were a criminal peddling stolen goods. I tried to read the newspaper, but the moment I turned a page, he cleared his throat loudly. Late for work or not, I could not pretend I didn't notice. Meanwhile, Marcus jammed his bedroom door with a soccer ball so that I could hear him firing off furious bullets of music through the shared wall. I nearly made peace by turning on my own mid-range speaker, but paused, realizing that yielding would only embolden them. So I sat in silence, my coffee growing cold, as their war of attrition slowly wore me down. Soon, Mom began flicking out passive-aggressive comments disguised as concern. As I fumbled through my morning routine, she'd poke her head into my room and whisper, "Are you sure you can afford that nice suit? You know, work clothes add up." Then she'd sigh, smile sweetly, and vanish, leaving me to wonder whether I was the weird one for earning and spending my own money. Dad would stroll in later, feigning casual conversation about the weather, before eyeing my worn sneakers and lobbing, "Someday you'll appreciate quality over thrift," as if he'd taught me some great life lesson rather than draining my bank account for 3 years. By the third day, their strategy evolved into staged ambushes. Dad would corner me in the garage, delivering lengthy lectures about loyalty and filial duty. "Don't forget how hard your mother and I worked to give you opportunities," he'd say, his voice low and measured, as if reciting lines from a family play. I answered calmly, "I never forget," but my words bounced off him like pebbles against a brick wall. Meanwhile, Mom scattered my belongings. A folded shirt here, my favorite video game disc accidentally tucked inside Sarah's suitcase there. When I tried to pack more efficiently, I caught her rifling through my boxes, claiming she was only checking to make sure nothing important got packed. "I'm your mom," she'd mumbled. "I have a right." Each night, I fled to the office to escape the growing claustrophobia. My employer gave me extra projects so that I had a reason to stay late. Gazing at the glow of my desk lamp, I felt a strange calm wash over me. If the house was their battlefield, Then my cubicle offered an armistice. I worked extra hours just to reclaim some sense of autonomy. Sometimes a coworker would peek around the partition and ask if I was okay. I'd simply smile and say, "Family stuff." But inside, I was tallying every phony apology and manipulative text in my head. My sister Sarah arrived during this maelstrom, acting as my co-conspirator. She rented moving boxes and coached me. "Pack your textbooks. Mom hates that you're going to college. Let her see you're still smarter," she'd tease with a grin. At night, we slipped around the house like thieves, hauling my most precious possessions to her car parked down the block so that none of it could mysteriously disappear. I set up a small camera in my bedroom to record any wrongful entries or furtive note-taking. Its red light blinking reminded me each morning that vigilance was now my default state. Neighbors peeked through their curtains, alert to every raised voice or slammed door. On day 7, Mrs. Carmichael from next door leaned over the fence as I loaded boxes. "You doing okay, hun?" she asked, offering a cup of coffee as if passing a baton of solidarity. It struck me then that everyone else seemed to understand a toxic family far better than my own parents did. By the end of 2 weeks, our home had become a minefield of unsolicited guilt trips, silent treatments, and helpful lectures masquerading as conversations. Mom wept in the hall. Dad launched into 5-minute monologues about my betrayal. Marcus blasted his music till I could feel the bass reverberate in my bones. But I held my ground. Built on sleepless nights and careful packing, I had carved out a mental fortress, however fragile, against their manipulation. When I slipped the last box into Sarah's trunk, I felt my pulse spike with a volatile mix of sorrow and triumph. The house behind me seemed smaller somehow, too small to contain the feud, too hollow to hold my secrets. As we drove away, I glanced back at the email notifications still unopened on my phone. More desperate pleas from Dad, more passive-aggressive comments from Mom, and one agonized text from Marcus begging me to reconsider. I didn't respond. Instead, I closed my eyes and let the city lights blur past the car window, knowing that in 2 weeks of psychological warfare, I had finally won my peace. I didn't plan to attend the barbecue, but when Dad's text popped up, "Neighbors having BBQ on 4th. Be there!" I knew it was bait. I showed up fashionably late in jeans and a crisp polo, carrying nothing but a bottle of sparkling water, and immediately felt the heat of every familiar face. The yard was a sea of red, white, and blue decorations, the scent of grilled burgers drifting in the humid air. Neighbors milled on plastic lawn chairs, clinking paper plates and laughing, all focused on my family, standing at the center like a living portrait of small-town perfection. Dad spotted me first, his grin stretching too wide, as if he were auditioning for a local commercial. "There he is, our big-hearted son who always helps out. Come on over." Mom, too, swept forward, her face the picture of maternal warmth. Sarah hovered nearby, folding her arms and shooting me a sympathetic half-smile. As I walked onto the lawn, Dad patted my shoulder like a prize steer. "Come join us," he said loudly enough that the neighbors turned to watch. "You must be thirsty after that drive. Grab a burger, son, all home-cooked." I forced a tight smile, nodded, then raised my hand so that a few wise old eyes caught the gesture. It was time. I took a step toward the elaborate buffet. Tables sagged under dishes of macaroni salad, baked beans, and Mom's famous brisket. The hush deepened as I pulled out my phone, tapped it once, and held it up like a signaling badge. A giant outdoor screen set up for a movie night flickered to life behind me, and I cranked up the volume just as Dad began to repeat how proud he was of his generous son. Instead, the first photo appeared, Thanksgiving dinner 2 weeks ago, the long wooden table laden with turkey and all the trimmings, my parents and siblings beaming, neighbors hugging, but not one chair set for me. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The image lingered for a beat too long. I looked at Dad's face. His eyebrows shot up, his mouth slack. Mom's wine glass clattered onto the table as she realized what I was doing. I cleared my throat. Funny, isn't it? How a small family gathering can be every single person except the guy paying the bills. The silence was deafening. I scrolled. Next image showed my name on the mortgage check for their house, $2,900 monthly for 3 years. Yet nobody ever mentioned that when they praised my help. The neighbors shifted uneasily. A few leaned forward, eyes flicking between my parents and the screen. I spoke slowly, evenly. "This one's for the car Dad said he couldn't afford, the Civic I bought Marcus," which was immediately criticized as basic. "And here," I tapped the screen, "Mom's credit card statement. $3,700 of my money gone to spa treatments and online shopping." Gasps echoed among the crowd, and I felt a surge of righteous fire at their stunned expressions. Dad stepped forward, his voice pitched too low for comfort. "You've gone too far." I held up my hand to silence him, then pointed at Mom's stiff posture. "You've used me for years, money for tuition, money for every broken appliance, money for a grill you used once. You charged me $800 rent every month and still acted like I lived here rent-free." A bead of sweat slid down his temple. I clicked once more. A final photo flashed. Sarah hugging her boyfriend on the couch, every spot at the table taken, laughter frozen in pixels. "Funny how family looks," I said. "Everyone's smiling, everyone except me." Mom's voice cracked. "Margaret, please." But she wasn't talking to me. She was talking to the neighbors assembled. I let the screen slide to black and lowered my phone. I saw tears glint on a few cheeks, embarrassment, sorrow, disbelief. The neighbors exchanged quiet whispers. Some backed away, unwilling to side with the dishonorable family that so publicly masqueraded as tight-knit. Dad's face flushed crimson. Mom's shoulders sagged like wilted flowers. Sarah's gaze met mine, eyes shining with relief and pride. Someone in the crowd murmured, "I'm sorry, I didn't know." Another neighbor shook, his head in disgust. I stepped forward and faced my family. "If this is what you call a strong family, then maybe it's time to redefine what family means." I slipped my phone into my pocket and turned away. The smell of smoke from the grill mingled with the metallic taste of truth in everyone's mouths. I walked past the stunned crowd, feeling light for the first time in years. Behind me, I could hear Dad sputtering apologies, Mom wailing, Marcus muttering about, "I just wanted a better car." But I didn't look back. I had made them face their choices in front of everyone they wanted to impress. In that moment, I realized the barbecue wasn't just a family event. It was their final performance, and I was the director who called cut. The day after the barbecue, our house felt like a morgue, quiet, still, as though the laughter had sucked the very air from the walls. When I woke that morning, sunlight filtered through my window in streaks, and for a moment, I felt a strange disorientation, because the house was supposed to be full of my parents' demands, my brother's entitled grumbling, my sister's knowing concern. Instead, I heard only my own footsteps echoing down the hallway. I padded into the living room and saw the Civic missing from the driveway, the spotless grill gone, Mom's expensive washer almost unrecognizable. The place looked like they'd swept all evidence of my generosity clean, as if in a desperate attempt to erase me from the family ledger. I poured coffee in silence, glancing at my phone. No missed calls, no texts, nothing. For a second I thought, did I overplay my hand? But the silence itself felt liberating. Later that morning, I called the bank that had been processing my parents' mortgage payments. I used my old account details, still mine, to dispute the last 3 years of payments. The representative sounded sympathetic but cautious. "We'll need documentation," she said, literally turning the burden back onto them. I had kept every single receipt, every electronic transfer, even that $1,200 I'd spent on Mom's upgraded washing machine. By lunchtime, I had scanned stacks of bank statements and forwarded them to the bank's fraud division. A few hours later, Mom's credit card was canceled. Another small victory. The dealership had already sold the Civic at auction. I'd quietly filed for my slice of the sale. $4,200 went right back into my account, a symbol that even their furniture, their appliances, and their ego could not siphon away my worth. Meanwhile, Dad showed up at my door. No panache, no "son, let's talk" spiel, just sheepish guilt and damp eyes. He handed me a letter, stiff at first, but unraveling into an apology that tasted genuine, if tinged with embarrassment. The next sentence he spoke out loud. I was wrong. It sounded like a plea, but because I'd already set my boundaries, I simply nodded. "The bank will sort out the rest," I said, not unkindly. He hung his head and walked back down the driveway, shoulders slumped. A man facing the collapse of both his empire and his illusions. Later that week, I found my sister's face on my doorstep, eyes bright with unshed tears. She'd printed out the bank's confirmation, a refund check for $12,400 meant to cover the misappropriated mortgage payments. Sarah leaned on me, her voice catching as she whispered, "We're free now." For the first time in my life, we were not shackled by their financial whims. It was a strange feeling to know that the dangers of being the helpful son were over. My sister and I spent the weekend hauling boxes to a storage unit, my prized possessions, once hidden away in the back of Dad's garage, now emerging like artifacts of my autonomy, my gaming console, tools, that battered but oddly comforting coffee maker. By month's end, the water and electricity at Mom and Dad's home were turned back on, thanks to late-night payments from Dad's dwindling savings, now properly allocated. My brother Marcus had moved in with a roommate, paying his own rent. He'd taken a part-time job at a local garage, chaining him to an employee ID instead of an entitled SMA text. Our parents downsized to a modest apartment. No washing machine with steam options, no grill with pride of ownership. Just a single-bedroom apartment with an old stove that required careful maintenance. It was humbling, but they had earned every penny of that lesson. As for me, I signed a 1-year lease on a small townhouse just outside the city. 2 bedrooms, a little yard, enough space for hosting friends without apologies. I splurged on a decent coffee maker. No guilt, no lingering sense of wasting money. That evening, I sat on my balcony with my hiking group girlfriend, watching the sunset stain the sky pink. I sent a thank you text to the neighbors who had witnessed my barbecue coup, a short message. Your kindness meant everything. They replied with surprise and warmth, a reminder that community was not defined by blood, but by shared decency. My parents called on their own schedule, tentatively at first. I listened, offered advice when asked, but never again sacrificed my own stability to rescue someone else's extravagant expectations. My brother reached out occasionally, sometimes offering carpool rides to my workplace, other times asking innocuously for some help understanding adult life. I'd help him budget groceries, guide him to wiser choices, but I never fell back into the old pattern. In reclaiming my finances, I'd reclaim my voice, my sense of worth, and ultimately, my freedom. The debt I paid had never been just money, it was self-respect on layaway. Now, with the dust settled, I walked forward knowing that helping family can be noble, but only when it doesn't cost your own dignity first. From the ashes of their manipulation, we rebuilt new relationships, honest, balanced, and respectful. And in that reclamation, I discovered a truth worth more than any refund. Family helps best when it helps itself. Sitting on my townhouse balcony that first evening, coffee steaming in my new machine, the sky fading into violet, I finally felt something I'd forgotten existed. Peace. All those years, I'd been running on fumes, paying someone else's mortgage, buying cars and appliances that ran more on guilt than function. But now, with the past firmly behind me, I realized that reclaiming my money was more than a fiscal victory. It was reclaiming my dignity. I'd faced down every manipulation, every family helps family guilt trip, and emerged free of that invisible debt. And here's the truth I want to leave you with. Sometimes, the hardest boundaries to set are with those you love most. Saying no to your parents or siblings can feel like betrayal, but if that no saves your self-respect, then it's the kindest gift you can give, both to yourself and, surprisingly, to them. Because by refusing to be an ATM, I forced my family to confront their own faults. They learned the hard way that the generosity of one person shouldn't underwrite another's entitlement. Now, every time I pour my own cup of coffee, without hesitation, I'm reminded that freedom isn't just about money. It's about being able to say no to unfair demands, yes to self-care, and maybe later, when someone tries to guilt you into funding their lifestyle. My story isn't unique. If you look online, you'll find thousands of others in similar struggles. But it's a reminder that even when someone calls you stingy or selfish, setting boundaries is often the most loving choice for everyone involved. If any part of this resonates with you, whether you've been trapped in a similar family dynamic or you're simply curious, let me know in the comments. Share your experiences, your lessons, even your fears about drawing those lines. And if you found value in this story, please consider subscribing. We'll be diving into more real-life journeys like this. Stories of standing up for yourself, reclaiming lost worth, and finding the courage to rebuild. Most of all, though, I want you to remember, your peace of mind is priceless. If you ever feel trapped by family expectations, know that saying enough isn't betrayal, it's bravery. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.